Hey guys, welcome back. I don't know about you, but I can't believe February is already over. Even with having the extra day because it's a leap year, I feel like this entire month has flown by. In fact, I feel like January and February went by in a blur, and now we're already in almost spring months. It's still a little chilly here, but either way, we're coming up until March, and it's just time's flying by, just too much for me. That said, another wrap-up video. So I will just get right into it because you guys know what these videos are all about. I've read a total of 9 books this month. 7 of them were romances, and I don't know if that was because we had Valentine's Day this month or I was just in the mood for more romances all around because I wanted little bite-sized candy versions of books, but that's the way the cookie crumbled. I'm doing a lot of food references because I'm hungry. But anyway, this month I also listened to my first Stephen King book. I actually read Mr. Mercedes. It was a buddy read with one of my best friends, and I originally wanted to start off my first Stephen King with Pet Sematary, but she convinced me to kind of ease into it with Mr. Mercedes because it is a mystery and she knows that I am a mystery / thriller lover, and she nailed it with the recommendation because I really enjoyed the book. I'm glad that I finally read my first Stephen King, even though I had this huge hype in my head. I wasn't sure if it was going to pan out, but I ended up giving the book 4 stars. I can see what everybody means about him being very detail-oriented because there are a lot of just minute details in the characterizations that did come through at the end to make the story more well-rounded. I'm definitely going to read more Stephen King going forward, but I'm probably going to be very selective with which books that I choose of his because I know he dabbles in different genres and some books sound more interesting to me than others. So yes, Mr. Mercedes, I give that a 4 stars. I plan on reading more Stephen King in the future. So in addition to Mr. Mercedes, I also read The Hens of Baskerville, which is the 15th book in the Donna Andrews Meg Langslow series. That was the other non-romance book that I read, and I really enjoyed this one as well. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and you guys have heard me talk about the Meg Langslow's mysteries just forever in my vlogs, but this one centered around a state fair that was happening, and I really enjoyed the particular mystery in this one. So if you're a fan of cozy mysteries, definitely check it out. I think it's one of the better ones in this series, even though I enjoy all the books, but this one especially I really enjoyed more than the other ones. Now, as far as the romances, let's just kind of breeze through these because I did read 7 of them like I mentioned, and they were all varying degrees of heat level, I would say. So kind of starting off with the more tame one, I read a Harlequin cowboy romance actually called Made for the Rancher. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It was middle of the road for me. It was a very sweet romance, and I didn't give it the 3 stars necessarily because it wasn't the spice level that I'm used to. I would have appreciated more insight into what each of the characters were thinking, just so that it made more sense for their feelings to culminate at the end for them to want to be together. When it comes to romances, I don't necessarily mind that instant love or when there's that connection right away, but I think that it does need to be expressed to the audience so that we understand, as opposed to the characters more so keeping that into themselves, and next thing you know they claim their love for each other and I'm just like, what? When? What's happening? So yeah, 3 stars for me on that one. Next up, another Harlequin. This one was called Match to the Billionaire. It's part of their Harlequin Desire line. And this one too got 3 stars, but for a couple of different reasons than the other one. It was also just middle of the road for me. If you guys saw my video when I talked about how I rate different books, 3 stars isn't necessarily bad, it's not necessarily good. In this case, the story was definitely enjoyable, but it wasn't memorable. So just really quickly what it's about, it's an arranged marriage of convenience plotline because a billionaire bachelor needs a wife just so that he can have basically a personal assistant. I know that sounds horrible, but the two of them obviously end up falling in love with each other. But I will say one of the things that kind of bothered me is that the heroine came into the relationship knowing the rules that our bachelor set out, and then she proceeded to almost immediately break all of them, just in terms of being too forthcoming with her feelings or expecting too much for him. And his whole thing was, you knew what we were doing coming into this, why are you changing everything up? But I think it could have been done a little bit more smoothly so that I empathize with the heroine more. But as it turned out, I was on the hero side a lot of the times when he was trying to explain, or rather trying to figure out why the heroine was essentially negating the contract that they set up for each other and how their relationship was going to work. Ah, yes. Okay, so next I read Not So Nice Guy by R.S. Gray. Again, you guys have heard me talk about her multiple times in my videos, and this book I absolutely loved. It was a really, really well done friends to lovers romance, and it was hilarious. As usual, every time that I've mentioned her, I said that she does romantic comedy very well, and this one was no exception. So essentially what we have, obviously they're friends. They work together as teachers, and the guy is this really hot guy who everybody wants, but she always sees him as, you know, just buddy, oh, that's my friend, whatever. But the two of them end up realizing that they have feelings for one another, and they get together pretty early on in the book, and I was a little confused by that because I wasn't sure where the rest of the story was going to head, but the author made it work. She showed us essentially how they were navigating their newfound relationship. I will say, and this isn't necessarily a spoiler, but they end up getting engaged very quickly. And I almost thought that they weren't actually going to get married, but yeah, it was very well done because to me the plot was unbelievable. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know, for them to have a great conflict in terms of like, oh, we can't really be together, what are we doing? But they end up being together and they end up working it out. And that was a different side of storytelling and romance that I wasn't expecting. But again, because it was done well, I really, really enjoyed it. So if you like romantic comedies, check this one out. If you like friends to lovers, definitely check this one out. I typically prefer enemies to lovers, but this one could maybe change my mind as to which tropes I prefer. Okay, so next I read A Favor for a Favor by Helena Hunting. This was a sports, more specifically a hockey romance, which is my jam for some reason. I've mentioned this before, but your girl has never even seen a hockey game, but hockey romances are just my thing so far in 2020. I don't know why, but I'm gonna ride this out as long as possible. I've read Helena Hunting's books before, more specifically other hockey romances of hers, and I really, really, really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it 4 stars. You can kind of think of this one as an enemies to lovers, but essentially what you've got is obviously the hockey player, and he falls for his teammate's sister, and the two start out very antagonistic toward one another. But when he ends up getting injured, because she's a physical therapist, she knows that if she ends up helping rehabilitate him, it could really help her career. So initially the two of them use each other, but naturally, as we all know, they fall from one another. And I mean, it was done very, very well. I really appreciate how she writes her heroes, because getting an insider's look as to what he's thinking, it's both masculine, but then also very sweet, but in a believable way. And I love that so much. So this one is part of a series. I think it's called the Favor for a Favor series. I'm not too sure, but I'm definitely going to check out the rest of the books in the series. And what I love in terms of how these are set up as series is that you're following different couples throughout each book, and there are references to other couples or maybe people that are going to become couples. So even if you read the books out of order, you might get a spoiler, but not necessarily going into it, because you know that if a book is about 2 people, they're going to end up together at the end. So if you like sports romances, I would highly recommend checking her books out. Her and Odette Stone, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one, but I know they do hockey romances really well. So if that's your jam, check them out. Ah, yes. Okay, so I read another R.S. Gray book this month, and this was actually my first what I would call medical romance. I read Hotshot Doc. Let me just say, starting off, I gave it 4 stars. I absolutely adored it, but going into this, I was very hesitant, and I'll be honest, I actually stayed away from this book for a while because I didn't understand, or I didn't see how it could be possible to have a romance that revolved around the medical field workplace. Even though I've seen Grey's Anatomy and I see how things go there, it's hard for me to see how people can become romantically involved but still keep it very professional when they're like performing surgery to one another. Well, you know, R.S. Grey totally proved me wrong in every aspect. I ended up giving this book 4 stars, I will say, and it is about a surgeon and his surgeon assistant who end up getting together, and they do stay professional. I will say there's never a time, even when they're battling their feelings for another, to where they sacrifice their workplace relationship, but the chemistry that they have outside of the operating room is just, ooh, it's so good. And again, there is that romantic comedy element in there, though not as much as the other book. What I really like about this one is that our heroine has a younger sister, and she kind of adds this side character humor and one-liner zingers, and seeing her and the heroine have their kind of singular family unit is so sweet. It's everything that I didn't realize that I needed in a medical romance, but it all perfectly came together, and now I am a fan of it. Oh, and it's so funny because there are actually Grey's Anatomy references in this book, and so I feel like that was a little tongue-in-cheek, and it did make me laugh because I thought going into it like, oh, it's gonna be like Grey's Anatomy. It's not, but they reference it, so it all works out in the end. Okay, so the last 2 books that I read were actually part of a series, very loose series in terms of 2 character couples who overlap and know each other. So the first book that I actually read it out of order, so let me back up. The first book that I read, which is actually the second book in the series, is called Mr. O by Lauren Blakely, and then the first book in the series that I read second is called Big Rock, and both of them are part of the Big Rock series. I actually listened to them on audiobook, which I am so glad, because Sebastian York narrates both of them, and as you guys saw, or maybe might have seen in my favorite romance audiobook narrators, he's definitely one of them. And essentially each of these are from a male only point of view, which let's talk about that for a second, because I have never read a book that is only from the male perspective. In my romances, it's either usually the female only point of view, or you've got both alternating points of views, which is my personal favorite. But having a male only point of view, which I didn't realize going into it, it was done so well. I didn't feel like I was missing anything because I didn't have the heroine's point of view. And again, because I listened to it on audiobook, Sebastian York just worked his magic. I mean, God, you know, between Blakely's writing and writing such a believable male character, and then Sebastian York delivering it, the narration was flawless in both of them. Now, in terms of which one I preferred, I did prefer the second book, Mr. O, because I thought that the storyline was a little bit more unique. Our hero is a comic creator, kind of a Seth MacFarlane type, because he's got this raunchy comic turned TV show, and he ends up falling for his friend's little sister, who is a magician. And just to kind of tell you how they're intertwined, the little sister's brother is actually the star in the first book, Big Rock, and he's just but he owns a bar, and he ends up getting into a relationship with his co-owner, who also runs the bar with him. So that plot line I thought was a little bit weaker, still very well done. I ended up giving the book 3 stars, but it was a heavier 3 stars than the other romances that I listened to, or read rather, because again, I think just coming off of the heels of the second book, Mr. O, which was just done so much better, I felt this one was a little bit much more of a disappointment. Maybe if I read them in the proper order, I would have thought differently, but I didn't, so here we are. But as far as Mr. O, man, that, first of all, both of those books are super steamy. So you've got Made for the Rancher all the way over here on the very sweet side, which they don't even have sex. You've got like some kissing and then that's it. And then we're over here with Lauren Blakely's Mr. O and Big Rock, and I mean like, whoa. And very well done, I will say. The sex wasn't necessarily gratuitous. Maybe it was, but it worked for the story. And I really liked the characters in both stories. I think that they were very fleshed out. And what's very interesting, and this speaks a lot to how good her writing is, even though it was only from the male perspective, you got a well-rounded look at how the heroine is. Even though you weren't inside of her head, even though you only saw her from the hero's point of view, you understood her motivations, you understood what she wanted, her needs, and I'll definitely say that these books were probably some sort of fantasy wish fulfillment, because the guys heavily emphasize how they get off on pleasing their women, making their women happy, doing whatever they need to make sure that the women are satisfied, and that in turn is what satisfies them. Obviously, that's not necessarily true in all of real life, but there was a heavy emphasis in it in these books, which wasn't necessarily over the top, but again, it worked for the book because it made the hero likable. And what I liked about it is that when it came time for the conflicts, when the conflicts came rather, each of the men were ready to freely admit their flaws. Now, in terms of flaws, I will say both of these books, the conflicts were, I don't want to say non-existent, but they were like little speed bumps. They weren't huge mountains. They were molehills, and they were very easily solved, which I was a little surprised about, just because I only expect that kind of easy conflict when it's a short story, but because these were actual full-length books or full-length stories, I expected a little bit more resistance before they were solved, but alas, that's fine. I'd rather have conflict that's a little on the lighter side rather than like a full-blown telenovela where it's just like way over the top. So in the end, I enjoyed both of them. Mr. O more so than the other one, but that's okay. I would highly recommend her books if you are a fan of contemporary romance. And if you do get her books, or these specific ones, definitely listen to them on audiobook, because like I said, Sebastian York does an excellent job narrating them. Okay, so there you have it. Like I said, I ended up reading 9 books. My reading progress was lighter than last month, but I'm not going to say that it was a bad reading month. I will say that, like I mentioned, I listened to a lot of romance. I guess I was just feeling it this month with Valentine's Day and everything. I don't know. I'm eager to see what March looks like. One of my most anticipated books is actually coming out next week, I believe, which is 8 Perfect Murders. So hopefully when you guys hear my wrap up at the end of March, I will talk about that one, because it's my plan to get my grubby little hands on it. And I'm curious if I'm going to, well, I'm curious which genre I'm going to lean more heavily towards, but only time will tell. So I will see you guys for another wrap up in about a month, and I'll see you guys in a couple of days for my next video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more content like it. And in the meantime, happy reading. I'll see you guys later. Bye!